All right. I listened, and when this thing starts, I look to see what the number on it is because you press the on button and it's like it takes a second or so, and you want to start talking, but then it's not recording. One thing I want to say about this trip with the Soviet Union, and again, yes, we'll never tell you that that song was about them picking up on my travails in Leningrad. Um, they didn't know what I was doing. And when I wrote that letter to Gentle Giant, and I guess I'm going to get to them here in a second, uh, that's when they found out that I had studied in the Soviet Union. They were only picking up on my feelings, not my. They didn't know what I was doing. So let's get clear on that. Okay, so talk about Gentle Giant. Well, I liked they like I think I said, or they were 1970 1980. They put out 10 albums. Um, their first few albums were not anything related to me, but then when they made their fifth album, which was called In a Glass House, that I thought was an extraordinary album, they started talking about me. And we were talking about how the peculiarities, to say the least, of Time. Um, their fifth album was called In a Glass House, like I said, and there was a novel by Dostoevsky called Notes from Underground, and I think that guy was in a glass house. But and that's been a metaphor that's been used in various fiction, the glass house. Um, in a glass house happened to me not too many years ago, and it's supposed to be the time before my fate comes true. And if you go look up Gentle Giant, now if you look at me now, I don't look like the guy. There's a picture of a man that they used as their logo or their symbol, and I looked like that guy when I was having some severe psychological and other difficulties, which happened to me after the third time I taught English in China. I came back in 2016, and many things had already gone wrong. I had it is not a heart attack to a doctor, but to a layperson, I had a heart attack, and I had to go to the emergency room, and I had to be hooked up to this machine, which I then my breathing was very intense, and I popped it, and it went away. That ended that episode, but I was tired for many months, and I had all kinds of difficulties, the likes of which it would take me several hours to explain them, which I'm not going to do. But I was in bed for almost 2 years, and I was very paranoid and had all kinds of things going on. I didn't have any health insurance, and I wouldn't have gone to a shrink anyway, because I'm not a believer in therapy, or certainly not for myself. And that's a whole other discussion, how I think about what I think about psychology, psychotherapy, and that kind of thing. A whole long discussion. Not a high opinion of it at all. But that was my in a glass house phase. They somehow they knew that about me, and I had it. And as I said, if you go on the internet and you look for Gentle Giant and you see the picture, you'll see a picture of this guy. He's totally bald, and he kind of looks like me. And he's got, see this thing with my third eye. If you, I don't know whether you can see it on the camera, you'll see that his third eye is like mine. And that's me. And that was their fifth album, which it came out in 73. And hey, this happened to me in 2018, or 2016 to 2018. Really, 2018, I finally came out of it after about 2 years in bed. And this is true. Because I was just devastated, a very bad time in China, and many other things that we'll just not going to go into this right now. Anyway, um, I got into Gentle Giant in about 1973. So a guy, how I got turned on to all this great rock music is a story of a guy that worked at this record store in Charlottesville, where University of Virginia is. I won't say his name, but the name of the record store was Back Alley Disc. And I bought tons of albums there, and they were just I lived in a time as just a lot of great albums coming out. And whether they have anything to do with me or not really is irrelevant in that context. But and so I would write in my checkbook BAD because I didn't have any credit cards. But it wasn't bad. The time, the 70s and into the 80s, the level of rock music that was coming out was phenomenal, would be an understatement. It was incredible music. And, I was a big fan of Yes, and you've already heard what I have to say about them in 2020. No, Gentle Giant, this guy who managed this record store. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have heard of Genesis. And Genesis knows. I did say it. I'm not getting into the details. Yep, the Peter Gabriel thing with Genesis. They know who I am, and I could care less. But anyway, this guy turned me on to all this incredible music, and I'll bet you I bought maybe 150 albums that he recommended. I didn't count them. Not one of them was less than a great album, because his taste in music was beyond belief. And in those days, I wasn't into classical. Today, classical is my favorite music. I love going to the symphony, and I know some of the musicians. But he knew about classical too, but I wasn't open to that. But then again, could I have afforded it? There's just, again, I can't overstate it. The music that was coming out when I was at University of Virginia, I'd go to the record store on let's say Tuesday and buy 4 albums. And I'd take them, and they were all great albums. And then I'd go to the record store on Friday, and I'd buy another 3 or 4 albums. And I'd take those back to my dorm room, because I was in the dorms my 3rd year, for example. And I'd play those, and they were all great albums. And then I'd meet people, and I'll admit it, I used to get high. And we would just listen to these albums, and these albums were just incredible. And another thing about this guy is he would get imports from England. And Gentle Giant's I think their 2 best albums, In a Glass House and The Power and the Glory, you had to buy imports. And I actually bought them at a place in Richmond later on, but I bought many imports from England of groups that most Americans, even people who were alive at that time, would not have heard of these groups. But they were just, again, the music was, I don't mean to get carried away, but it'd be hard to overstate the quality of the rock music that was coming out in those days. And as I said, today, God, as much as I like classical, I don't know if I'd even had time. And if I'd actually studied some, well, at college, well, that would have been another discussion. But I didn't study very much. I did study communism, and that's why I understand that the people, I don't know whether I mentioned this in one of the other videos, there are groups of people who want to take America down. I know I did mention that, and believe me, they're communists. They may not subscribe to the Marxist doctrine, but they're communists. They want control, and they don't want anybody to say, have any right to make decisions except them. And you don't want to live under a system like that. I already told you. Soviet Union, nope, you don't want to live like that. China's different, but it is controlled. So Gentle Giant, and I'll tell you a story about, because I used to, as I said, take drugs and listen to many of these albums. I was getting ready to go to the Soviet Union. It's getting into September of '74, and I'd had I needed some money, but it took me a while before I got my bearings about how to make money when I got into doing computer work. And so I'd had a very unsuccessful summer financially, which was not good. But I decided a couple of days before I went to the Soviet Union, I was going to take acid, LSD. And we were leaving on Wednesday, and so this was a Monday, and I figured I'd give myself a day to rest after doing acid. And I'd done acid a number of times in college. didn't get into the consciousness effects, but then again, when you take stuff like that, you'll learn about your consciousness anyway, even if you're not into those things. And so I had bought the album I just was talking about, In a Glass House, which was an unbelievable album. I've read that the record company didn't think it was any good at all, but I thought it was a phenomenal album, and I had just bought it. And when I was in the record store, it said, and now they've got another album coming out over the weekend or something like that. Maybe it was Monday. And so I went to I knew they were going to get it, this album called Power and the Glory. And as I said, it was an import. And so I went to the record store, got it, took the acid, and I put on this album, and it just absolutely blew me away. But again, they were talking about me. There's lyrics on that album. It's like they seemed to know that I was going to do something that had to do with the world. And so that was quite an experience the Monday before I left. But, you do those things, come down, got to get on with your life. And in this case, I was going overseas, and that was the first time I went to Paris, too. We got to go to Paris coming and going to take our test to see, where we were at, and then when we got back, if we had improved and all that stuff. So I'm past the 10-minute limit, and here we go again. So I think I'm going to put a wrap on this. Who I am. This is the background. This is how I figured it out. These are some of the people who know who I am. And I'm going to have to get some strategy, because how am I going to go from the 70s to 2020 and get into some of these things? And maybe I don't even need to. I could get into my positions about things. I don't have a lot of notes. I'm doing all of this just from memory. I'm not reading anything. I did write some notes on a couple of things I wanted to do, and I don't even know whether I've done them. So anyway, I will say that's the end of this one.